The graphics engine in Warframe has been a point of discussion for a while now, going as far back as 2020 if I remember correctly. It mostly concerns people like me on the PC platform, as consoles, and you can feel free to correct me on this down in the comments, do not have any sort of toggle to switch between the enhanced and classic versions of the graphics engine. In fact, I believe all of the mainstream ones, bar the Switch, have been updated to the enhanced engine, so there's nothing much to talk about for those peeps. For those of us on PC, today's video will be an analysis on the current state of both the graphics engines and also an observation on what progress has been achieved since the last video I put out relating to this topic, which to my understanding received hate on the Warframe subreddit for completely false reasons. So we'll see how this one goes.
And just a general reminder that if you do enjoy regular Warframe content, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos.
If you've been out of the loop, Digital Extremes have put out a forum post and even announced in one of the more recent dev streams their intent to eventually phase out the classic engine due to time and resource costs and having to maintain both it and the enhanced variant. The way it was narrated, to me, sounded like the classic engine was going to get axed by the time Duviri launched, which of course was not the case. Part of the reason I believe is because the enhanced engine really does not seem like it's quite ready for prime time. Now, I would absolutely love to discuss performance in terms of raw numbers between the two graphics engines, but I'm not going to pretend I have multiple test benches set up for that kind of thing. Although I think we can all agree that unless you're running a super high-end set of components, the performance hit going from the classic engine to the enhanced one is quite significant for a lot of players. With that said, I did manage to gather some anecdotal data from the Discord peeps. Invite link is in the description, by the way, if you would like to join. The setups involved were somewhere around low to mid-range, stuff like an RX 6600, your typical gaming laptop with a 12500H and 3050 or 3060, so nothing too crazy or nearing potato levels. The overall consensus was that the enhanced engine seemed to suffer from significant stutter and instability to the point of frequent crashing. This was also the case for me, even after a few days past Duviri's launch, but we've had plenty of patches since then, and I think it's safe to say that performance now is probably better and certainly more stable. With that said, things are not exactly perfect. The enhanced engine still takes a significant toll on performance, where even a Legion 5 equipped with an i5 12500H and RTX 3060, as mentioned before, can't quite punch much above 100 frames at Quad HD. Admittedly, expecting games to run at 144 or 165 frames at resolutions higher than 1080p is a bit of an ask, but something that's easily possible on the classic engine then suddenly becoming exponentially harder on the enhanced engine, even on a system with mid-range specs, does kinda underline the steep increase in performance requirements to maintain a similar level of experience. And yes, I know the laptop 3060 is a little slower than the desktop variant, but that's mostly down to the difference in TDP. As a matter of fact, the desktop 3060 is more cut down than the one that's shoved into laptops, believe it or not. Just goes to show how garbage the desktop 3060 would have been if it were not for the 12GB of VRAM. Anyways, everything I mentioned with regards to performance was also more or less the case with a desktop system that had an R5 5600X CPU paired with an RX 6600. And all testing was done in Duviri, as it seems to be the most demanding area in the game as of now, along with the demos, of course. Alrighty, let's switch gears and take a look at visual quality differences between the two graphics engines. Nothing too scientific, as I'm not really an expert in these matters. I also want to put emphasis on drawing your own conclusions based on the individual scenes. For the following comparisons, I've all the settings turned on or maxed out within reason, with the exception of depth of field, which was disabled for some of the open world scenes. I also do not have any of the filters on here that are usually put on the B-roll type shots, just plain footage. Starting with this Arc Harbor scene, we can see a more textured environment going with the enhanced engine. It is very apparent, and this could be due to the world of Duviri being designed around the newer renderer in mind. As we'll see later on, that this stark difference does not necessarily scale across all tile sets in the game. Anyways, aside from the textures, the shadows are better and the lighting perhaps a little more accurate due to the sun now being able to cast shadows. Jumping over onto Deimos, the differences are much less obvious already. The enhanced engine seems to employ less fake shadows and maybe slightly better lighting, but here's the same scene with custom settings I used to run for recording footage, which is basically the classic engine with particles, bloom, and depth of field turned way down or off. Personally, I find this presentation far better simply due to the absence of bloom, which at the default value of 50 is far too much, at least for this scene. There's just way more clarity going with a much simpler looking game. Not to mention the boost of performance, which is probably a lot more appreciable in Deimos, with it being one of the more demanding areas in Warframe. Please do let me know down in the comments which of these three you think looks the best. Moving on to one of the few remaining old Corpus tile sets, the difference between both engines really comes down to a little better ambient occlusion on the enhanced version. There is no perceivable difference in lighting or textures, and this really does highlight that unless you're playing on newer parts of the game that were probably designed with the enhanced engine's capabilities in mind, you're not going to gain much in fidelity for the performance hit that comes with said engine. But what if we were to turn all of the enhanced engine specific settings off? Can we possibly make the game scale down to the point of running as good as the classic renderer while also preserving some of the improved lighting and shadows? Well, the short answer is not really. The game on the enhanced engine is not going to have a good time on a potato or anything lower than a GTX 1650, I reckon. The visuals will still look a little better at the very least, but there is a significant difference between the enhanced engine on low versus high, if you will. Here are a few comparison shots of Cetus, each with different settings. Again, you should draw your own conclusions, as visual fidelity can be a subjective matter, but to summarize, SSAO on high is a noticeable upgrade over SSAO medium, which is the lowest setting over off. Sun shadows also appear more significant out in more open areas, but as we have seen in some of the past scenes, textures remain largely, if not completely, the same. So, while the enhanced engine is better in terms of visual fidelity, albeit not by much in some areas of the game, the classic engine still makes an argument for itself with the significant performance boost. Warframe, even on the older engine, still looks really good for how well it runs, so the devs want players to actively switch to the newer enhanced engine so they can ditch the old one. Forcing a change every time the game receives a hotfix or update and stating the enhanced engine is now the default one, in my opinion, is not the way to go. DE needs to make the enhanced engine a no-brainer option, if not through superior performance, then perhaps superior features that apply to all areas of the game, not just the new stuff. Upscaling tech like DLSS, FSR, and even XeSS would be a great addition. It was never really needed when the classic engine was the predominant one, but as we transition to the newer enhanced engine with its more demanding graphical features, I think better upscaling options would be greatly appreciated by those of us who love high refresh rate gaming, as long as it isn't used as a crutch for performance optimization, which I can't speak much of in the case of Warframe. This game is leaps and bounds better than most of the new stuff that gets released these days in terms of optimization, but if there's a bit of code work that could be done to make the enhanced engine run better, then that's all down to the developers to sort out. I would also love to see higher res textures as an option, though for the most part, resolution and sharpness seem to be much less of an issue compared to the textures themselves and how they look. The spores that spawn from the spore ephemera, for example, I feel is not very good looking and kinda ruins the ephemera for me. But considering the fact that Warframe consumes less than 3 GB of VRAM and even less than 2 GB in a lot of scenes, I think DE can afford to bump up the texture setting to Ultra sometime in the future. Any form of ray tracing would probably be too heavy for most users' setups, but the thought of Plains of Eidolon rendered with ray traced global illumination does tickle my fancy. My point is that the devs need to do better to convince players to switch from the classic graphics engine over to the enhanced one. If that's just gonna take a while to achieve, then maybe fixing the current DOF implementation would be a good start. It would be really great, especially for someone who does a lot of Captura, compared to the one in NVIDIA Ansel when that feature used to work in Warframe. The in-game depth of field is really bad. But yeah, I hope I don't have to make another one of these types of videos complaining about graphics in a game where it's probably the least of its problems. Not to mention these things are incredibly time and energy consuming for next to no return other than your wonderful comments and opinions. If you'd like to share them on the Discord server, links are in the description as always. Patreon and the merch store also help support content like this. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a good day.